The justice dilemma, choosing an appropriate course of action to an injustice that occurred to you in your past. This is something that many of us are faced with, myself included, and I'm going to share that with you in this video. But this is a big topic because as we look towards telling new stories and choosing new narratives and creating new futures for ourselves, we can often bump up against a past where there was injustice. And the question is, what do we do with this story? We can't just pretend it didn't happen. We can't deny it, although probably many of us have tried to, but it doesn't work. So what do we do? What do you do? And I'm going to share what I did so that perhaps if you are facing this dilemma, this video may shed some light, help make it easier, because this is a very personal, very difficult thing that some of us, many of us, certainly myself, have gone through, and that's just part of this process. So today it's a big topic. It's a big sharing. It is going to be another one of those videos, but I really wanted to share this story because I know that some of you are actually dealing with this dilemma right now. So that is what we're doing today. My name is Headley, and if you'd like to know more about me, you'll find that info in the box below this video. But we are just going to get straight into today's video because this is one of those videos where I am going to be sharing my personal experience with this. And it's going to take a little bit of time, so I wanted to set it up properly and then just get straight into it. And in fact, I wanted to share it last week and then I chickened out. And then in last week's video, Flying Like a Heroine left a message, a comment that was absolutely synchronistic, which described exactly what I had been wanting to talk about last week. And I was like, oh my gosh, if that's not the confirmation I need to go forth with this, then I don't know what is. And of course, it is the confirmation I needed. So let me just read out the comment because I think it sums it up quite perfectly. So I'm recovering from very serious family abuse. A Pandora's box. Once I opened, it's difficult to unsee, but also the emotions coming up are really heavy. I can take legal action. I have a watertight case with evidence. I'm struggling with the need to face circumstances while taking legal action, but also knowing my state is everything. I'm finding it a difficult tightrope to walk, and at the same time, I'm having many days where I'm mastering my state and choosing to focus on who I am. Just turning away from the reality of abuse and ignoring it or not taking action doesn't feel right. I want to put it to bed, but I'm being called to face it. Thanks, Headley. Whew. Thank you so much, Flying Like a Heroine. I saw your comment and I was blown away because that is exactly the video that I was going to make last week. There's a number of reasons why I wanted to make this video and share this story, and that is because for me to continue to do this work and do it to the best of my ability and as authentically as I can, I have to show up as authentically as I can as the student of this work, which I am in my own reality, which we all are. Now, in the last video where I shared a personal story of mine, which was my specific reflection, I mean, that felt pretty big just sharing that story. But there is a much bigger story that has been running behind that for certainly, well, I'm going to say pretty much most of my life, let's be real. And that has also involved the justice system. So I wanted to talk about that today, but I'm going to set it up properly, and I'm setting it up so that I can feel safe in the sharing of this story. And of course I do, because I wouldn't be sharing it if I didn't. And also I know that when I share these stories, somebody else, at least one person, is going to benefit from it. If anybody else is facing this, then this is going to help because I've been through it. I know the difficulties associated with it, and this is very much a reality. As part of these teachings, we are talking about telling new stories, creating new narratives, moving on to new timelines and into new time zones, and creating entirely new realities for ourselves. However, we also have to acknowledge the realities that we have come from. And part of this work is acknowledgement, not affirmation, it's acknowledgement. There is a difference. I don't know how long I'm going to speak for. It may take a while, but I am going to set this up properly. That means this is not one for kids. The reason being, which goes into my second point is a trigger warning. In this video, I am going to be speaking on topics of sexual assault, child sex abuse, attempted suicide, and the justice system. These are all pretty heavy topics. Please do look after yourself. I'm not going to go into any detail into any of these topics, but these are topics I am going to be speaking on, even though it is a positive and uplifting, and I promise it does have a good ending. Please do look after yourself and put yourself first. If this is not the time to listen to this video, put it away and go and do something else. By all means, come back to it later. What else? I do not speak about anything I haven't processed fully. So you can relax. I am okay. Everything is fine. I have fully processed this, and I'm going to share how I know I have, because that's part of this story as well. When I say processed, I'm actually talking about revision. I have new memories. I have a new narrative playing out. I know that might sound weird if you're hearing this for the first time, but I will explain a bit more about it in this video. And that means that I can acknowledge the old story without being triggered by it, or without being caught up in it, or without responding to it as if it was real and happening now, which is what happens when we tell the old stories. So as you know, I do not tell old stories just for the sake of telling old stories, but sometimes I do have to acknowledge the old story in order to explain how I got to where I got to, so that you can do the same in your reality. And when we're talking about trauma, which is what we are going to be talking about in this video, it is important to have revised it, because if you are just repeating the trauma story, you are going to be re-traumatizing yourself, and reality is going to be reflecting that back. We all have a setup story. By me sharing mine does not mean that mine is any more important or special or anything than yours. Everybody has a setup story coming into this physical existence. Everyone has trauma in that story, and that story is the setup to our awakening, and that's why so many of us are here. We're here because of what we went through, and we are waking up from that. So let me just get into the story. I'm just dancing around it now. Okay. When I was 23, which is 23 years ago. Wow, that's weird. So yeah, when I was 23, which is 23 years ago, I was sexually assaulted by a man who I was introduced to through my father. I was 23. He was a lot older. I think he was about 50. And he gave me a drug that rendered me unconscious, and then he had sex with me while I was unconscious. I woke up. I didn't understand what had happened. So that was the event. I obviously knew something was wrong at the time, but I didn't have a language for it. So there was no concept of rape or sexual assault in my language at that time. However, very quickly after that, I began experiencing symptoms, and I can look back on it now and know that that's what it was. But I started, after that event, life got pretty tough. I found things just a lot harder. I started falling into depression a lot more. I started to become very obsessed with wanting to end my life, and I would think about doing it. I would often sit on cliffs. I would, I kind of was just obsessed with just getting out of here. I just did not want to be here. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I didn't know what to do, and no one seemed to be able to help me. I went to doctors, I went to therapists, and because I didn't know what had happened to me, there was no way I could share that with anybody. So it was a very confusing time. I ended up acting out, doing things like, I was partying pretty hard and just doing things that you do in your 20s that seem normal to somebody who's in their 20s, and yet it didn't feel good, it didn't feel right, and life was pretty tough at that time. I was also having flashbacks back to the event, but I couldn't understand why, because again, I still didn't understand what had happened. I was just having a reaction to it. Also, if I look back now, I was experiencing all the symptoms of sexual assault, but because I'd been unconscious, I didn't know it was sexual assault. Everything felt a lot harder as I was heading into my 30s, and then my father died. Now, when my father died, everything just really escalated. Everything just got a lot more out of control. I felt more pain than it felt normal, even for the losing of my dad. The pain that I was in even felt beyond what should be natural grieving process to that event. So everything just kind of intensified and got escalated to the point where I was just in so much pain. I ended up in a 12-step course for what was then called sex and love addiction. But for me, I was identifying with the love addiction, which wasn't love addiction, it's shame addiction or unworthiness addiction. I mean, you can't be addicted to love, right? So I went through that program fully, and I discovered in that program that what I had been through 10 years earlier by now was sexual assault. In fact, the word that was used was rape. Now, at the time I became aware of this event, I was also in therapy for coming to terms with the fact that I had been molested as a 9 to 10, 11-year-old by my diving teacher. So I had no capacity to deal with what I was just coming to terms with, which was sexual assault. I was dealing with being molested as a child, and that was just, I couldn't handle anything else. So I parked the sexual assault and I focused on the child abuse. Now, when that happened, again, I'm a child, so I didn't know that that's what that was. But again, after that, I experienced the symptoms of that. And about 10 years after that event, here in Australia, they had a crackdown on pedophilia called Operation Paradox. I remember it very clearly. It was Operation Paradox, and it was a crackdown on pedophilia here in Australia. And they were asking people to come forward, or the police, this was a police program, was asking people to come forward to report child sex abuse. Again, I have revised this version, and I can remember the revised version as I'm speaking, which is why I'm able to speak about it. There's definitely, I'm feeling a reaction in my body, but I also know what to do with it because I have got the new story. So I'm just being aware of that. Again, I hadn't told anyone about this at the time, but I knew by that stage that what this person had done did constitute pedophilia. And I contacted the number. Took me a long time to contact the number. I really, I would call the number and hang up. And I probably did that a number of times until I finally had the courage to stay on the line and report my experience in brief detail. They asked me to come down to the station to file a report, which I did. And that was a horrendous experience. The person that I met with was obviously a cadet. They were new. They were probably more terrified than I was, and I was terrified. So there's two terrified people sitting in this tiny, grey, horrible office. It was just horrible. And I wanted to get out of there as quickly as possible. So anyway, I made my statement, and then I got the call maybe a few weeks later to say that while they had received other statements, there was nothing that they could do about it. They didn't have enough evidence, which did not make sense to me because they had at least 5 statements. Turns out this guy was a known pedophile who had been abusing kids for some time. So I had reported the child abuse when I was 19. Nothing was happened, and I just put it to bed. I left it alone. And then when I was in the 12 steps, it got reopened, and I thought, okay, I've got to deal with it. So I went back to the police and I spoke to a couple of lovely detectives, and they reopened the case. And they did an investigation, and they found out that this person, the diving teacher, had died of a heart attack several years earlier. And while there had been a case against him, nothing had ever happened. And they told me, look, there's not much more we can do because he's dead. So I consulted a lawyer. Actually, I had done that first before I went to the detective. So I'd consulted a lawyer who specialized in child abuse. And she said I really only had 2 options, and that was to sue the aquatic centre where the diving classes happened, or I could go through the government's victims compensation schemes, which meant that you can put your case in and the government will simply give you an amount of money and consider the case closed. I looked at both options. Now, the civil option, where I would sue the aquatic centre, looked pretty horrendous because I'd be going up against a big organisation. Obviously, they're going to want to defend themselves, so that's going to be a pretty arduous and long process over a number of years that may result in nothing. If anything, perhaps a small payout or a big payout. That was the risk that you took. The other option was I put my case in with the government and they give me an amount of money and consider the case closed. That is the option that I eventually took. So I did that, and it was relatively easy, and I got a check in the mail for $10,000, and then that was considered the case closed. Now, I remember receiving the $10,000, and I was weighing it up against the impact that this event had had on me, and I was like kind of looking at this $10,000 because, according to the government, the case was closed, done. And by me receiving the money meant I couldn't take any further action. And I just remember going, okay, well, it's nice to have $10,000 in my bank, but it doesn't mean anything. Like, it didn't do anything. It didn't change anything. The impact was still there. It's just I had $10,000 more than I had before. It was kind of a weird experience. And I just remember going, it's so weird. Like, shouldn't I feel something? Shouldn't I feel better in some way? And I just didn't. Nothing changed. So I, again, put that to bed because I had to. When it came to dealing with this sexual assault, I was looking at that experience going, well, there's no way I'm going to the police now because that was an awful experience and there's no way I want to go through that again. So I'm going to have to find another way to deal with this. Also, Because the person who had sexually assaulted me was an incredibly high-powered business person, they are not famous, but they are very high profile. And I say are in present tense because this is actually still the case. They run a lot of companies. They're on the board of a lot of companies. They have a lot of money. And I thought, there's no way I am going up against that. So I tried to put that to bed. Now, the thing with sexual assault is, as much as I tried to put that memory to bed, it just continued to haunt me. What I mean by that is just everything got harder. Relationships were virtually non-existent. My self-concept was non-existent. Everything just was very difficult, and I became more and more obsessed with ending things. So the harder things got, the more I wanted to opt out of life. And then in 2016, I did take the action that I was believing would finally, once and for all, end it, because things had just got too hard. Life was getting hard. I felt completely defeated, and I just couldn't do it anymore. I was like, I'm out. And so I took the action. As soon as I took the action, I knew I had made a mistake. So I did call an ambulance immediately. However, I had taken the action, so that was out of my hands at that point. I was in ICU for a number of days, and then I was in hospital for a number of weeks. And I remember the doctor saying, Headley, what you did, most people don't get a second chance. Like, when you do that, that's it. Lights out. So for some reason, perhaps because I had the realization immediately that I'd made a mistake and called the ambulance, I got that second chance, which again is part of the reason why I am so committed to doing this work, because this is the realization I had after taking that action, was that suffering was not my legacy. Healing and helping myself heal and helping others heal was my legacy. That was going to be my legacy. Now, because I got that second chance, things did start to turn around. That event led to my book, Right Way Home, Writing My Way Back to a Meaningful Life, which got picked up and published, and I actually got a publishing contract for that, and they ended up publishing 2 books. So life definitely started improving, in particular because the suicide card was off the table now. So after a lifetime of just wanting to end things, that was now off the table. So I could at least start taking positive action and doing positive things with my life. However, the impact of the sexual assault did not go away. I could not get my stuff together in terms of relationships. Everything still was quite hard, but at least I was here and I was making things happen, such as writing my book. But I just could not shake that memory. I couldn't shake the trauma. So in 2017, I decided to move to Bali. I was going to get out of Australia. And this is the other symptom of that, is like, you are running. You are constantly running, trying to outpace yourself, trying to get away. This was part of my life, was just traveling and trying to outrun these memories, trying to outrun the pain, trying to outrun the abuse story, trying to outrun reality. And I spent so much of my life trying to outrun my reality. So in 2017, I moved to Bali thinking, okay, this is going to be it. This is where I'm going to restart my life and everything's going to go well. And very early on in Bali, I did a water purification ceremony on the 11th of the 11th at 11:11. That's my number. That's the angels. And so I thought, okay, that's a sign. 11:11. I'm going to do this water purification ceremony, and I'm going to rid myself of toxins, because this ceremony is designed to rid yourself of any toxins, like spiritually, mentally, emotionally, as well as physically. So I went through that process. I did the ceremony, and went on for a few hours. And that night I got the runs. And I've spoken about this in my other video, Manifest of Physical Healing, because that night I got the runs and I thought, okay, great. I'm purified. Excellent. It worked. Awesome. Little did I know that experience, those runs, TMI, would continue for the next year and a half. And they would not get better, they would get worse. So for the first 6 months, I just managed the symptoms. Obviously, it was inconvenient, uncomfortable, but I managed the symptoms pretty well. But then after 6 months, I was like, this isn't normal. I should probably do something about this. And as soon as I started to try and do something about it, things got worse. I started getting hospitalized. I couldn't hold anything down. Everything was just running through me, and I was losing a lot of weight. I'm already thin as it is. So I was becoming very malnourished. And I was just in and out of hospital, and I was in Bali, so it wasn't great. So I ended up coming back to Australia. I did all tests, every test under the sun. I did colonoscopies. I saw experts, and things were just getting worse and worse. But of course, the test results were coming up like nothing was wrong with me, which was just insane, which told me that it wasn't a physical issue. During that time, I found Dr. Joe's work. I'd already known of Dr. Joe, but I found his work again, and I started really doing his meditations. And I really do credit his work for helping me to turn around a life-threatening situation, because it had got life-threatening. It was a year and a half in, and I was now vomiting as well as everything else. So I could not hold anything down, and it was bad. I was definitely on my way out. And I do credit Dr. Joe for helping me turn things around at that point, because I just had to go moment to moment to moment to moment. I mean, the irony is I spent a lifetime wanting to end my life, and then I'm faced with this illness, which was almost ending my life. And that's what helped me turn things around. I spoke with a medical intuitive who told me that this was my body's way of ridding itself of trauma. As soon as she said that, I knew exactly what she meant. And she says, you have to acknowledge the trauma. You can't just will this away. And at the time I had that session, I was house sitting, and around the corner there was a police station, and I knew exactly what I had to do. Now, this is in 2019, so this is not too long ago. This is almost 20 years after the event of the sexual assault. I walked around the corner and I walked into the police station, and I went up to the counter and I said, I would like to report a historical sexual assault. I met with Detective Murphy, who was an angel sent from heaven. And he took me into the office, and it was unlike the last time I had gone through this process. Detective Murphy sat down with me, and over the next 2 weeks, 12 hours in total, we sat together for about 3 or 4 sessions, about 3 or 4 hours each. And we went through the sexual assault in detail. He got every detail as much as I could remember, because I was unconscious for most of it. And that was the first time I had acknowledged the story in full. I told the story. I'd never told the story before to anyone. And here I was talking to a stranger, a detective, and telling him absolutely everything. And he got everything down. He challenged everything. He got every detail. And it was so therapeutic. It was the first time I told the story, and it felt like I was getting the story out. And that's what I realized why I had been so sick, because the story was wanting to come out. And that is what we have to do with our stories. We have to get them out, whether we get them out on the paper or we get them out to another human being. That's the acknowledgement. Now, acknowledgement is different to affirmation. There's no affirmation here. There's just the acknowledgement of the story. And that was the one piece that I hadn't done. I was trying to get around acknowledging it. I didn't want to acknowledge it. I didn't want it to be true. And I spent so long trying to not make that story true by not acknowledging it. If I don't acknowledge it, it's not true. But I was experiencing the truth of it through my body, and it was almost killing me. And it almost killed me multiple times. So by acknowledging the story, I got it out. It got onto paper, and there was my police statement. So then it was the case of, okay, that statement now gets passed on to the City of Sydney, which is the jurisdiction in which the crime happened. And at that point, we're now talking about arresting this person. Now, this person, as I said, is very high profile, and they have a lot of resources available. And I was terrified, because the minute that arrest gets made, that makes front page news. What I found out throughout this process is that the police and the media have a relationship, which is when an arrest is made, a kind of like a press release goes out. Hi, Dora. A press release goes out, and there's a box that gets ticked, which is this story in the public's interest to know? And there's the box, and so the police tick it. So if this person gets arrested, that box gets ticked, and this becomes national news. Now, I could apply to have my name withheld, but that also didn't feel quite right either. It felt like I had something to hide and that I was somehow wrong, and I didn't feel comfortable with having my name withheld, but I also didn't feel comfortable having my name splashed all over the news. So I was terrified, and as they are doing their investigation, it's getting closer to the point where they're deciding whether or not to make an arrest. So I was terrified throughout this whole process. I was scared that he was going to pick up on the fact that he was being investigated, and somehow that would get back to me and I was suddenly in danger. So I spoke to a social worker, and she said, look, most cases of historical sexual abuse, they are long, they are arduous, they take many years. There is a very small percentage of the person or the defendant being charged, because the criminal justice system is founded on the principle of proving a crime beyond reasonable doubt. Now, when you're talking about sexual assault, let alone historical sexual assault, it's very easy to prove reasonable doubt because it's just your word against their word. So I knew by going through the criminal justice system that it was going to be very hard to prove that what I had to say was true and that that's what happened. But also his defense team was going to come at me and they were going to tear my statement apart. They were going to look for every possible hole. And that's the setup of the justice system. And that's why it's there, so that it's a fair process. However, what I learned was that less than 7% of sexual assault cases actually get convicted. And then, of course, there's the appeal process. Many of those convictions do get overturned in the appeals process. So very few people do get convicted and go to jail. So then I started playing the scenarios out of going through the criminal justice system. One, it's all over the media, and then he gets acquitted. Now he has the right to sue the media for defamation, which makes me the liar. Then I played it out. Okay, well, let's say he goes through, he gets charged, then he gets acquitted on appeal. And again, same thing. Third one is, let's say he does get charged and the appeal fails, he goes to jail. Then what? He's in jail for a couple of years, and then he gets out. I'm still left with what happened, but now I'm in fear that he's going to somehow retaliate. Every scenario I played out, I couldn't see how I come out of it even better than I did going into it, because I'm still left with the trauma. Anything that happens through the criminal justice system does not change the trauma. And that's what I was wanting to change. I was wanting to change how this event had impacted my life. And the criminal justice system, even though it has value, and there's obviously value to it and it's necessary, I couldn't see how it would help me move through this trauma. So by this stage, I am in just absolute despair. Not only am I re-traumatized by the whole thing, but now I'm terrified, because then I hear that they are going to arrest him. And at which point, once you press that button, then it's all on, like there's no going back. And then I received a reprieve. COVID. The court system shut down, all the courts were shut down, all the borders were shut down. So suddenly everything is on hold. And I am just thinking, oh my God, whoa. Like, it was amazing, because I was just like, it was the reprieve I needed, because it was just getting so overwhelming. They couldn't arrest him because he lived in another state and the borders were closed. They could have got an exemption, but that would have taken a lot of time. But the other thing was that, let's say the case did go forward, it was going to be a couple of years, because there was a backlog of all the court cases because the courts were closed. So now I was not only facing what would have been a couple of years, I was now facing 4 or 5 years of my life going through this court case, plus the impact of everything that would happen after the case was finished. I looked at that and I just went, I can't do it. There's no way I could do it. I had just had some time to think about everything. It was amazing because, obviously with COVID, everything stopped. My whole life stopped and I needed it too. It had all got too much. And then halfway through, I moved up here to the Northern Rivers. And by then I felt, because I had acknowledged the story to Detective Murphy, I already had started to feel free of it. Like just those 12 hours with him, it felt like my therapy. The acknowledgement of the story felt like it was out of my body and I could finally move on with my life. So when I moved up here, that's when I came across Neville's teaching. I just threw myself into the works of Law of Assumption, and I came across revision. Now, one of the things that they talk about in the criminal justice system is that, especially with historical sexual assault, is the reliability of memory. So the court will challenge the memories and they will say, well, they're unreliable because they happened so long ago. So it occurred to me, well, if the memories are unreliable, which means they're not fixed, Neville's saying I can completely rewrite them. Why am I hanging on to this memory in the first place? Because by now the rape was just a memory. It was no longer happening to me, but because that was the memory, my life continued to reflect back that state of consciousness associated with memory, because it was such a big one. Trauma is something that freezes in the body and it just locks itself in, and it can feel like a freeze frame where you freeze in time of the trauma and you just stay there, even though your life appears to continue in linear form. Emotionally or spiritually, it can feel like you're just locked in place at that point of trauma, and your reality just continues to reflect back the trauma forevermore. And that's what my life felt like. So I decided that I wasn't going to just rewrite this story. I was going to revise it completely so that it never happened. Now, revising trauma is not like revising bumping your head on the bathroom mirror. It's like taking a pickaxe and just pickaxing and just kind of like picking at the memory. I couldn't just imagine another event where that trauma didn't happen because it was like a rubber band. My brain would just go back to the trauma. I actually had to work it through from the point of the trauma. I had to start making different decisions and revising the trauma differently. I won't go into exactly what I did to revise the trauma. I'll do that another time. It took probably a couple of months to actually get the new memory locked in to where I actually started to receive results in reality that confirmed the new story. And I was thinking to myself, do I want to move forward with this case? Because the case was still open. And I called the detective. This is back in now 21, just before I started the channel. And as soon as I got on the phone, I was like, no, I can't. I cannot go through the criminal justice system because doing so would have me telling the story that I've just revised. I would be back in the trauma memory. I would be back re-traumatizing myself and I would be reliving it all over again. And I had come so far and my life was looking so different and feeling different and I felt like a new version of myself. I was like, there's no way I can go back to that story. That story almost killed me multiple times. There's no way I can go back to it. So I hung up from the detective and I just knew then that I would not be going forth with this case and that was it. I was letting it go. But I still felt I had to acknowledge it in some way to him. Now, this is personal preference. I don't know if this is right or wrong. I just know for me, I wasn't going through the criminal justice system, but I still had to acknowledge it. So I got this person's number and I composed a message. Now, I'm a writer, so I know how to pack punch with my words. And I spent time on this because I knew I had one shot at this. But I wrote still to this day what I think is probably one of the most brilliant things I wrote. And the base of it was, we both know what you did. I am handing back to you the shame, the unworthiness, the violence, the inhumanity. And I said, I'm giving it back to you. This is yours to carry from now on. I have been carrying it for these last 20 years. This is now yours. There was no anger. It was fierce. It was direct. And it was loving towards myself. It was not hateful. It was not angry. It was none of those things. It was just me speaking up for myself to him and saying, what you did not kill me. Almost did, but it didn't. And I am now here stronger as a result of what you did. And I wrote that text. I sat with it for a few days. And when I was ready, I pressed send and I sent it. Of course, I didn't receive a response. I didn't need one or want one. But it felt great to just acknowledge it, to at least between him and me. Like, just that acknowledgement also felt important. And then I just got on with my life. By now, I've started the channel. Things are going really well. Everything in my life had started to go well. Everything, like law of assumption, gave me my life back. In fact, one of the reasons why I know that I'm not in a relationship is because my relationship with self was non-existent when I came into this work. I had vacated myself long ago with the abuse from my childhood. And not only that, I had spent most of my life trying to destroy myself. I mean, I had actively tried to kill myself and I had thought about it so often that by the time I came into these teachings, I had to build up that relationship with self, which is why I started with self-concept. I had not been home. No one had been home. And I was just learning to trust myself again, to know that it's safe to be with myself again, to come home to myself, and to know that when something didn't go my way or things got hard, I wasn't going to turn on myself and try and destroy myself, which is what I had done in the past. So I can actually say that since coming into these teachings, the love I have for myself is so great. It's just a completely different reality I'm living. I'm literally living a different reality based on the revision of the trauma. Last year in June, I thought, have I explored every option? And am I comfortable with letting this go at the third dimensional level in terms of the third dimensional justice system? And I actually came across an article in the paper where somebody had gone through the civil justice system in regards to child sexual abuse. And they had won and received a significant amount of money in response for what happened. So it was like $800,000. And the civil justice system is a lot easier to prove because you're not proving beyond reasonable doubt. You're proving probability that it happened. So it's a lot easier to prove the crime in the civil court. Now, I'm not a legal expert, so please do seek a professional on everything I've said. I am not sure entirely if this is true, but this has certainly been my experience. So I contacted the lawyer who was in the article, and we had a bit of back and forth, and he said, before I agree to take this case on, I'm going to need to see the police report. So I needed to contact the police. I got the report. As soon as I opened that report, I just had a visceral, no, I cannot tell this story again. I'm done. I'm finished. This story is not worth whatever amount of money I would be up for in the civil court. I just thought it's not worth it. I'm the source of money. I don't need his money, and it's not worth me telling this story again. I've revised it. This is not worth it. I'm out. So that just completed it for me. And I think with something like this, you have to at least explore the options to see if it's right for you and to feel into if this is right for you. I felt into the justice system, the criminal justice system. I felt into the civil justice system, and both of those did not feel right. And then I realized that there is divine justice. There is infinite justice. This universe is perfectly balanced between justice and injustice. It is infinite justice. So I just decided to go with that justice system, which was the divine justice system of I am. And I did the work on this person from the I am perspective. It was very intense. It was very deep. It was very profound. About a month after sending that text, there was an article to say that his marriage or his relationship had broken down. And then about a month after that, another story had come out that he had been diagnosed with a terminal illness. This was not long after I sent that text, and I handed back all of the shame that I had been living with that almost killed me. So I thought, okay, that's divine justice. But then I had been working with this is just last year. So I have been working with these teachings. I know everyone is me pushed out. So even though I felt some sense of satisfaction about this, I also was like, he's me pushed out, reflecting me back. And here he is diagnosed with a terminal illness. I don't feel good about this. I didn't feel good. So I revised it, and I revised that he was well. A month after, there was another news article. He had been given a miraculous cure. The doctors had retracted the terminal diagnosis, and he was miraculously cured. I was just like, what? And I was like, you know what? Okay, we're done. I'm done. This is finished, and I can finally move on with my life. And that is where I am today. And the reason that I can share this today is because I know it's done, and now I can share it in the hope that this may help somebody else, because when you are doing this work, you are going to be bringing up old stories, and some of those stories are going to be of abuse, and that abuse is criminal. And the question is going to be, what do I do with this? Where do I go with this? Who do I talk to about this? And the options are the criminal justice system, the civil justice system, or the divine justice system. And I believe through my experience that you have to at least explore all of them to know which is right for you. They all have value. They all have their purpose. But I can say the criminal and the civil justice system will not heal the trauma. Whatever happened, it will still have happened regardless of whatever result you experience through those justice systems. The only way I have been able to find true healing is through the divine justice system and the revision of trauma. It is absolutely possible to revise trauma into a completely different narrative. It takes time, it takes persistence, it takes commitment, it takes discipline, it takes a good ice pick to pick through some of those memories, but it can be done. I am the example of it being done successfully. This is not something I was taught. I figured this out and it works. So if you have gone through any form of abuse, there must be an acknowledgement of it. You must acknowledge it. You must acknowledge what happened. The more you deny it, the more it hits you in the face and just keeps coming up to you. The abuse story must be acknowledged in some way, somehow. That doesn't necessarily have to be through the justice system, but it could be. It's up to you, whatever feels right. But until you rewrite that story will continue to show up in your reality and reflect back. There's just no other way around it. So however you get there is very personal, and I just want to say that if you are facing this dilemma, it is possible to get through it, but you can only do that through your own way and figuring it out for yourself. And you will just keep in mind that everything that is happening in your reality is here to help you. And it is helping you awaken to who you are, which is the infinite I am of your reality. Nothing that happened in your reality is fixed. Even your past can be rewritten. And when you know that, then you can get to work at rewriting it. And then if you still feel like you need to acknowledge the story, there are options through which you can do that. That's a very personal preference. That'll be very individual to you. The justice system has its value. It's there. It's there to help people who have been subject to these crimes. For me personally, I could not see a way where I could go through those systems and come out any better than I did going into them. I just felt like by me trying to punish him, I would be punishing myself as well. And I had already been punishing myself for the last 20 years. So I'm losing my voice. I've been here for an hour. This may be the longest video. This is the longest video I've made. However, I felt it was an important one. Do what you need to do to bring peace to yourself, and just know that you will get through this. There is light, and of course, you are that light. Thank you for listening. I will look forward to seeing you in the next video. Bye.